Hey peeps, we need to talk about one last thing, resistance and Ohm's law. So in your assignment, you found out a little bit about resistance, something that opposes the flow of electricity, so you don't have to write this down. Energy gets used, it's kind of like work's done, so like lighting a light bulb, that's even a form of resistance. But you can think of it kind of like uh, water that's flowing. And when you have something that obstructs that flow, it has resistance, like a rock or a tree in the river. Okay? Things that you just want to be aware of is that resistance we abbreviate with an R, and the unit for it is called an ohm. It's abbreviated with this omega symbol. Okay? So that's going to play a role in what we end up doing. Well, don't worry so much about this part. We'll get into that. But it's how things that we measure in the circuit relate to each other. We have this law. It's called Ohm's law. And it has the equation I equals V over R. And these letters, or this equation, I want you to copy down into your notes. You need to know it. Okay? It's nothing that you have to memorize, but you need to know how to use it. And so it's on reference sheets. It can be used in your notes. That's fine. And some of it's pretty obvious, like V stands for voltage, R stands for resistance, I stands for current. So why is it an I and not like a C? Because current was first described as intensity of electricity, and so that's why it used an I, and it was a French word for intensity. Yeah, that's kind of just a little bit behind it. But you need to know that I stands for current. And units for these things, current's measured in amps, voltage is measured in volts, that one's easy. And then resistance, it's measured in ohms. You need to be able to recognize those. So when you're solving out for something with Ohm's law, and you're using or solving out problems like this, determine the current of a circuit that has a resistance of 40 ohms and a voltage of 1.5 volts. And same process that we used to go through before, pick out what it is that you know, and or list out things that you know. This 40 ohms, that's our resistance. This 1.5 volts, that's our voltage. And it's the current that we don't know and that we will solve for. Then it's our equation. I equals V over R. We put things in where they belong. We are going to solve for the I. We put the 1.5 in for the volts, the 40 in for the resistance, and then we can solve it out. When we divide 1.5 by 40, we get 0.0375. So when we get our answers, a couple things. You want to make sure that you know how to do this, set this up correctly. Many times people end up kind of flipping these around and thinking like, oh, I got a really small number, I must have done it wrong, and they'll just flip around the numbers. Don't do that. You have to set up the equation and you have to divide correctly or solve it correctly. So you get a really small current. Small currents are just fine, but you also need to have the correct unit. And the unit for current, it's amps. So you can either write it that way or you could write it this way, and that is fine. So make sure that you solve it out. Your answer should make sense for the most part. We have a low voltage with some more resistance to it. Yeah, we're going to get a small current. And so that's that part. I'm going to show you just one more. So here we go. It says determine the resistance of a circuit that has a voltage of 0.25 volts and a current of 0.005 amps. And so when we're solving it, we need to recognize what we have. Here's my voltage. Here's my current. Remember, I represent my current with the letter I. I'm going to solve for the resistance. So there's the stuff that I know and don't know. I use an equation that relates all that stuff together. This I equals V over R. I put things in where they belong, like that 0.005 amps, that goes in place of the I for the current. The resistance I am solving for on the bottom, and the 0.25, that's the voltage up on top. So here's my setup. Be very careful about how you solve this. It's just like stuff that we saw at the beginning of the year. When we are solving for this r on the bottom, it's not multiply these things together. You have to undo stuff on this side to get r by itself. And we do that by multiplying by r because it's being divided by r. So it's not being divided by 0.25, it's being divided by r. Multiply by r on both sides. And then I have r times 0.005 equals 0.25. Now to solve for r, I have to divide each side by 0.005. Divide by 0.005. Those things, the 0.005s go away on that side. I get my resistance, R, is equal to 50 when I divide these two things. Okay? So just be really careful when you set this up because many people will end up multiplying these things together. Don't do it. Don't do it. Set up your equation. Make sure you know what you're doing. And so your work, it's there for you, not for necessarily for your teacher. It's for you. Okay? But last thing, you got to make sure that you have the correct unit. And your unit for resistance, it's ohms. You can draw the omega symbol. You can say ohms like this. That's fine either way. But that's how you solve out problems and use Ohm's law and relate current to the voltage and the resistance. And all right, we'll see you guys.